Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today it is time for us to discuss some of the potential targets for the Jaguars in the 2025 NFL free agency. So, we're going to talk about a lot of players here. You can technically see them all at the top of the screen, so spoiler alert. But before we get into the specific players and going through these positions, I want to talk about the Jaguars cap situation and where they stand right now. This is over the cap. I'm recording this basically right after Christian Kirk got cut and doing that video. So it hasn't updated yet, but I have the move here. So Jacksonville sits almost at $50 million in cap space, and so means you can spend a bit, right? There's more info to that, I think, to be fair. And a lot of this I've tried to compile in this document I've been working on now for a little over a year, where it keeps track of not only the cap hits, but what's the average spending on players, how much money have we pushed to the future, because ultimately, we got to keep in mind is when teams are making these moves, they are not just thinking about 2025 and let's look at the cap and let's ignore the future, right? They're considering the big picture. And so when you look at the big picture, there's more things that ultimately matter, right? So you may have, and this is a little bit lower of an amount, partially because I'm including rookie players in here, the rookie pool. So this is the money you'll have to spend on that as of now, and that'll be subject to change whenever they inevitably make some trades. But Jacksonville, ultimately, yeah, $50 million, somewhere around there is what they have to spend. The average per year spending on this team, so this is the cost of the player and this portion of their contract. So that can have specific context, that can be pretty simple to understand, it just kind of depends on the guy. I've always used the Trevor Lawrence example, where like this year would have been his fifth year option, so I write what the fifth year option would have been. You get to 2026, and this is really the value of the player at that point. Even if cap hits don't really reflect that as much, that's what they agreed upon for what his value was after the rookie contract was over. So you add this all up, and this is something I definitely think teams consider. You have a little bit of money that you can spend. Before the Christian Kirk move, they were essentially breaking even. And so my opinion was that the Jaguars would basically spend as much as what they ultimately cut off the team. And so right now, that sits around about $14 million. I think there might be a little bit more money that they free up, because right now, just my gut feeling is I think that they move on from Evan Ingram. I think that's going to happen. I think maybe part of it is looking for a trade partner. Maybe that's why we haven't got news on that, or maybe why it could play out later on down the road. Who really knows at this point? But that is just my gut feeling that I do not think he'll be on the team, especially considering how they've talked about Brendan Strange. So if you make that move, that's another nearly $16 million. And so you've got some money to spend. And I think that, I think that comes out pretty close to what I would expect them to spend in free agency, where I think they're going to get a couple starters, but I don't think you're going to necessarily see the bulky levels of spending where we're going to bring in 5 or 6 starters on the team and we're going to throw on a billion void years to everything and all that sort of stuff. And especially, with him, it was a lot of like targeting players who were kind of average at their positions, to be honest. Didn't really stand out a ton, and a lot of them didn't work out in Jackson. And so you hope that changes, but I think we'll see something a little bbit different, although I think they are going to target some starters for the Jaguars. So it is time for us to jump into this. We're going to start with a really simple one here. Kyle Trask. Trask has not played a lot during the regular season. You see he's got 28 yards passing over his career. But Trask is someone that would be familiar with the Liam Cohen offense. He's had a year under it. We need another backup quarterback. He kind of makes sense. He also got the Florida Gators connection. And so I could see him wanting to come to the situation, being an easy option as a backup, and someone that ultimately is not going to cost you more than maybe $2 to $3 million. I'll show cap numbers for what players were previously paid on here for most of them, but if you go down and you do find him, which I don't even know if he's on here, There he is. It's like 1.3 million because he's coming off a rookie contract. So it's not a player who was earning a ton of money before. And, obviously looking at his track record in the NFL, I'm sure he's played a lot during preseason, as you'll see here. 1,600 plus yards in the preseason. He's not someone who's going to, not going to garner a ton of money. So I think he's a logical backup for the Jaguars. I think it would be logical for him as a player to want to come to Jacksonville, where he's going to be a little bit more familiar. It's not that far away from where he played in college. So makes a lot of sense there. Now, getting to the next guy we're going to talk about, who I don't know if he makes it to free agency, but if he does, I think that Jacksonville is going to go to war for him, is Chris Godwin. So Godwin was paid $20 million in his last stop. We'll actually take a look at where they have the market value for him currently, which is $22.5 million, which I could see that play out. Godwin, I think he makes a lot of sense for Jacksonville if he gets released. He was a guy who had a phenomenal season under Liam Cohen for the part he was able to play. Played the first 7 games as a slot receiver, moved back inside. I think he had previously played more outside the season before. Yeah, you see that right here in 2023. 61.6% of the snaps he's playing out wide. Moves back inside. They got Jalen McMillan, play him outside. And he puts up 576 yards in those games. Now, we'll do the math here real quick. So, if that's 7 games, okay, 82 yards a game roughly. If he was healthy all season, wow, did not like that. If that works. Almost 1,400 yards as a receiver. Okay, so that's important to consider in context. That's kind of what I looked at when T. Higgins was available, because, yeah, T doesn't have like way over 1,000 yards any season, but you look at what he's done on a per-game basis, and if you can keep that player healthy, well, I mean, he's going to be a huge big-time receiver, and when he is healthy, he's playing at that level for you. So you have that type of guy when he's on the field. Now, similar to T. Higgins, the question with Chris Godwin is health, right? He obviously missed some games this last season, had a season-ending injury. It was a brutal end of the season for him. And so there's the big question of, like, how do the Bucs pay him now after that? That's the end of his contract. He's out with a season-ending injury. So that is the concern for them and why he might hit the market. But I think if he does, he makes a ton of sense for Jacksonville for 2 reasons. One, insane production. Getting what would be an incredible wide receiver, too, alongside Brian Thomas. And on top of that, the other side of this, I don't know if the grades really reflect it. But I know watching him, it's a pretty good run block. And the grades don't really show it as much in recent years, but he was kicking ass there in 2024. And that's a big part of what this team is going to want to do on offense. They're going to want guys who are involved in that regard. And so I think Chris Godwin ultimately makes a lot of sense for the Jaguars. He was having a career year under Liam Cohen. You go back through these seasons, right? Most yards he had in a year, 1,333. If he had stayed healthy this season, did not have the season-ending injury, which you look before. I mean, he's consistently got over 100 targets a year. So I don't think health is like a long history as far as an issue. It's just more so the recent injury. But 1,333 yards, and we just looked at this, he would have had more than that this season. On top of that, and you don't even know, I don't think they were in the playoffs that year, but still, more yardage. 5 touchdowns in 7 games. On that pace, he's going to get double-digit touchdowns, and he's having a career year in yards and touchdowns for them. So that player hitting the market, what is his value? I think it comes out similar to where it was. Maybe it's a short deal with him, but I think you're looking at about what Spot Rack said, where maybe it's $22.5 million. It might get bumped up as well just because, well, how many great receivers are on the market? Who are you going to have to compete against? You got teams like the Patriots who are going to be involved for these players. And they might just go out there and say, hey, we're just going to give you an offer that you can't refuse. So we got to spend this money. It's got to go somewhere. There's not a ton of players to spend it on here. And so you're going to be on our team. So maybe that happens, but ultimately I think like 22.5 million, maybe as high as like 25 would be my guess. We'll of course see where it goes because you look at the cap, we are up almost 100 million from where it was in the COVID year. That was like 182. So things just get crazier and crazier as far as how much these players are getting paid. Now we're going to talk about offensive line quite a bit here. That's a lot of the talk of the 5 remaining players we're going to go over. But we'll start with Mekhi Becton, who we're going to look at his contract he signed. I don't know what position he'd be listed as on here. I know he played guard with them. Let this load. If it feels like it. Apparently, okay, there we go. So we're going to find him on here. I have, oh my gosh. I don't know why he's hiding so bad here. He doesn't even show up for me. Okay, well, screw Spot Rack. We're just going to ignore that. So Mekhi Becton signed a 1-year deal with the Philadelphia Eagles. And on that deal, had what was his best season. Now, you see a lot of what's appealing with Becton. Immediately, your eyes go to 6'7", 363 pounds, right? It's why he was the 11th overall pick in the 2020 NFL draft. You also have a younger player here, right? He's not even 26 right now. But he played right guard for the Philadelphia Eagles. You see every single snap there. And he had a great season, right? Was it perfect? Not necessarily, right? You still got sacks given up, a decent amount of pressures, but he was a good guard for them and a big part of their Super Bowl run in holding down that position. Now, I think Jacksonville will be interested in him. The question is, does he hit the market? And on top of that, are they going to offer him, or is a team going to offer him so much more in Philadelphia that he says, yeah, I'll leave? And the reason why I say that is because for his career, Philadelphia was a big part in him being able to make it to free agency this year and have a shot at a pretty good paycheck. And him enjoying football, right? You go from the Jets where things were rough the last few years, especially his last season where Rodgers goes down the first game and everything they had hoped for was pretty much thrown in the trash right off the bat. You go from that to playing with Philadelphia where you win your first Super Bowl. Everyone's seen the clip of him sitting on the ground basically just crying. I don't blame him. It was an incredible moment for his career. Does he leave that? Is the big question. And that's where I kind of have a hard time saying that he ends up on the Jaguars. I think he returns, but I think this is a player that Jacksonville would be interested in, especially because of what he's done in the run game and some of these bigger performances. And you look at his whole career where he grades out so well, right? Mostly average pass protector, but some really good run blocking grades over his career. And I think the film would back that up as well. Now, getting to our next guy, Tevin Jenkins. He is coming off a rookie contract, so class of 2021 here. He is a really good football player, right? I mean, PFF would at least say so. And I know he's been talked about a lot, and he's got good film. And when he's on the field, it's going to be a really good guard for a team. The question, the issue here is, look at the snap count, right? Every single year. Okay, he's played slightly more recently. He starts at 160, probably playing like later in the season, I would bet. We can actually check that really quick. Yeah, so he starts at the end of the year, plays some of these games. He actually played pretty well outside of his first game against Green Bay, but you also don't have a ton of snaps after that. You go to, we'll just go back to 2024 and look at it all. 2022 has a really good, great run blocker, good in pass protection. You see steadily climbing here and steadily having good grades as a run blocker. Very consistent. But what's not good is the consistency of not playing the entire season, right? 576 snaps, 731, 738. Technically, it's getting better each year. But this is a player that you'd have a hard time expecting him to be healthy for an entire season. So, if you remove the injuries, Tevin Jenkins might be the next guard to get paid a lot of money. And I don't think necessarily like $20 million, but I think You could see him be somewhere between the Damian Lewis number of like 11 million or so, and maybe where Robert Hunt was. So maybe around 15 to 16 million a year is what he's getting. But you have a player who's not available enough, right? For all the talk about Chicago wanting to build up the offensive line and to go out and get a top tier running back, we just watched them trade for 2 players today to play guard for them. They are moving on from Tevin Jenkins. So clearly they have an issue with bringing him back. So I don't think he's going to get that kind of money. I think this is a guy who maybe signs, I would say, a 1-year deal with the team, probably somewhere around $6 to $8 million, and you have the potential of getting a great football player who's healthy the whole year, right? That's the potential. You could also get someone, turns out like what a Marcus Davenport would have been last year, where, hey, a lot of upside, had some injury issues. You bring him in, he gets hurt the second game, and now there goes $7 or $8 million, right? That's the fear of it. So I think he lands below what he could have got if he was healthy all the time. And this guy is a high risk, high reward sort of signing. And I could see Jacksonville looking at this and saying, hey, why not take 1 year, take a shot on this guy? Let's get some guard depth in case he gets hurt. And maybe we get a really good football player out of that. I could see them do that. So I think Tevin Jenkins, definitely a player who is on the table for them. The last one I'll mention of the offensive line, and Dalman, I don't know. I don't know if he's going to make it to Jacksonville. You hear a lot of things about like how high the price is being skyrocketed right now, but I have to mention him because there's a clear need at center. I don't think Mitch Morse is good enough for what you're wanting at that position. I think you want to definitely upgrade. You want to have someone who can dominate on the interior, set the tone for you. And so Drew Dalman as the top center in what is really an offseason that doesn't have many options here. You got him, and then you got the tackles who might move inside at the NFL level from the draft, and then maybe the Georgia center, Jared Wilson, could be good. Not a ton of options, though, compared to what we're used to. So there sounds like there's going to be a bidding war, and we saw a report earlier today about the Falcons expecting to lose him, that it's quickly gone out of their price range. And so I don't know if Jacksonville spends like crazy on this type of player. They pay him 15 or 16 million, but you look at the track record, it's been a phenomenal run blocker his whole career, playing incredible football there. As a pass protector, he's gotten better. He struggled early on, but you see this last year after a game against Pittsburgh, where he is playing some pretty tough opponents, consistently playing well. Right after that game, you have one sack given and some hurries. That's it over the rest of the season. Of course, he got hurt in between here. That's a little bit of a concern, but you still have a player who played the last 2 seasons pretty much in full. So I think you could bring in Drew Dalman, and he would make a lot of sense for what you want to do at the position and the type of player you want to bring in. The concern is the amount of money that is going to be spent on this guy. And on top of that, you consider that he is a player who hasn't been a great pass protector throughout his career and suddenly had a much better season at that. Is that going to be consistently who he is? And what it kind of reminds me of is Lloyd Cushenberry from last year, who got paid a ton of money, right? Kind of the opposite here, technically, because he was a good pass protector and then got together as a run blocker the last year. But he got paid like almost $13 million, something around there. And you look at it, he gets hurt in the season, but not really playing incredible. I guess like you don't have sacks, which that can be very dependent on the play, and it's not really the greatest stat to go by. Maybe more so it's the pressures that you're giving up on the play. But film is going to triumph. You still had 14 pressures on the season, right? He was not necessarily that same player that he was before. And so I would worry if you're going after a Drew Dalman that you might get results like that. And then you're quickly asking yourself, why did I just pay this center $16 million a year to play for me with 1 season of a complete overall good game? So that's kind of the concern. Now, another seems, well, we've talked about a few injury guys, right? Guys who haven't been healthy enough. Another one of those that we're hearing a lot of buzz for the Jaguars about, and I'll go ahead and say right now, I expect him to be a Jaguar next week. There's so many things being said about this. It just feels like it's going to happen. Sort of reminds you of like when Gabe Davis was followed by Trevor Lawrence on like Instagram like a few days before free agency, Mitch Morse as well, and all those things. And it's like, okay, well, we'll probably see something happen there, right? I think this is kind of similar in a different way. There's just a lot of talk about Davis being an option for the Jaguars. Now, Davis, throughout his career, been a really good corner. The question is how often is he going to be on the field, right? This is a guy you're going to have to pay a lot of money most years. You look at what he earned this last year with Detroit. It was like $14 million, $14.5 million. And he did not play the whole year. He ended up getting hurt. And so now you got to ask, how much do we pay that type of player? And I think it's still a decent amount. I just think it more so impacts maybe the length of the contract to where you're not bringing in this guy for like 3 years or something like that. This is probably a 1 or 2 year type of deal that you would sign Carlton Davis to. And I think that probably sits somewhere around 9 to 10 million. Maybe it gets higher. Just maybe I'm not factoring in the cap increase enough, because we could see some crazy things that we got to get used to. But I think this is someone that you could take a shot on who doesn't cost you as much as usual. And if he plays healthy the whole year, or at least, say he's around for the playoffs and your team makes it there, well, hey, it's a great deal, right? It's sort of like if we got Chris Godwin and say he gets hurt early in the year, but he's playing late in the season and around the playoffs, I'm okay with that, right? So maybe this works out really well if you go target a player like this. But you see some great performances from him. And he's a corner, I think, who could really do it all for this defense, someone who's going to be capable no matter what they ask. And this is going to be a defense that we're not going to see one heavy tendency. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think you're going to see man and zone, decent amount. I think you're going to see 3-4 fronts, 4-3 fronts, and I should really say 3 or 4 man fronts, because linebackers they do a lot of different things with. But Carlton Davis, I think, is a really good fit for the Jaguars. Should be somewhat of a bargain for what he would normally get paid, I'm guessing. We'll see what the case is, right? And I say that because season-ending injury, and you're going off that, right? It's a little bit different with like Drew Dalman, where, hey, he did have a big injury, but he came back late in the year. He's healthy now. You don't got to worry about that anymore. So Carlton Davis is a player I think who makes a lot of sense for the Jaguars to bring in this offseason and shore up that cornerback spot, where there's some options in the draft, but it seems like things are shifting very quickly away from cornerback and very quickly towards offensive line, or maybe even another wide receiver. We'll have to see what happens. Now, final guy, we'll end this off on someone who I actually would have drafted way back in the 2021 draft. He was one of the guys I would have taken, Trayvon Mullen. So he's interesting. Not a great overall career heading into this last season, just sort of like your average, playing all right type of prospect you get in the second round. Took a big step, right? You see some incredible run defense from him on film, hell of a tackler, all these things back it up. And someone who, as a coverage player, maybe there's questions there. It's always been maybe the bigger thing with him. But he is still a very talented safety, and maybe someone that you have in that strong safety role, where you saw him play a lot of this last season, making the transition after week 4 to playing strong safety, and he had a really good year of doing it. So getting that type of player on this team, a young guy who's going to get better each season, I think that'd be a good addition for this team. You also have a big need in the secondary. You're going to have Andre Sisco probably going to another team. I think that's pretty much inevitable at this point, because I haven't heard anything about them trying to re-sign him. Not a word. So Trayvon Mullen makes a lot of sense. You bring him in as a strong safety, because you really had 2 free safeties before in Andre Sisco and, who's our other guy there? Darnell Savage. So getting in someone like Morig could make a lot of sense for this team. And maybe they play Darnell as more of a slot anyway, and that doesn't really matter as much what position Morig can play. But you don't really have much of that strong safety presence, because the only guy I'd argue that way is probably Antonio Johnson, and I think he's been a lot better in the slot anyway. So it's not really where I'd want to put him. So this is a player the Jaguars are missing. Could get him on what probably would end up being an expensive deal. He did enough, I think, later in his career. I guess that's not doing it justice, really. He had a really good end to his rookie deal, to where this player could be earning in the mid-teens per year. And so, do you want to take a shot on that? Hope he continues to get better, continues to improve. I think that's fair to do. I also think there's some pretty good opportunities to get a strong safety in the draft, and that would personally be the direction I would want to go there. I wouldn't want to go spend big on a player, even though I would have probably drafted this guy. There was a point where he was top of my board when, the pick came up. But still, just a little too much for me. But I could see the Jaguars being one of those teams that tries to target him. And the rumor is apparently that they might be comfortable just bringing in one guy at safety and having Andrew Wingard start across from him, which, if they do that, hey, I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. I think Andrew's shown that he can start when he's been on the field, and that's been what's great about him as a backup. So, it'd be ideal to have him as a backup, but is he a capable starter? I would say yes, just not some, elite type of player, clearly, because if he was, then he's getting paid a lot more and he's starting for this team before this season. So those are our guys. As far as who I think they take off this list, just my bet right now. Keep in mind, last year I basically struck out on every single prediction I had, so I'm not even going to lie to you guys there. It's hard to know what's happening unless it's like, the Carlton Davis sort of stuff where it's just nonstop being mentioned, or we hear this from like an insider ahead of time. I would say I think Kyle Trask comes in. I think Chris Godwin, if he hit the market, could sign with the Jaguars. I think that would happen. I don't think he hits the market, though. I think Tampa Bay brings him back before free agency opens, so I'm going to say that doesn't happen. But the caveat. And aside from that, I would say Carlton Davis. I don't think Jacksonville gets any of the big-time guards. I think they'll be interested, but it feels very quickly like maybe the focus in the draft is shifting that way. Even if it's not at pick 5 or a small trade back, maybe you're moving up from 36. Got a lot of extra draft capital. You got a potential ideal suitor in the Vikings, who I've mentioned a few times now. At 24, hop in front of a division rival, go take a player at their position of need that you need yourself. Could see something like that too. But I think that's going to be an early focus for this team. And if they don't get someone big in free agency, I think they could survive as long as they've got a plan in the draft and they at least feel like that's the best player on the board. Because you never want to reach. You never want to be egregious with that and plan for your needs in the draft without having them align with your value. So, with that all said, I appreciate you guys watching. I'm going to shout out our channel members: Premier Nasir 904, Nightmare Eco, Gator John Bites, Scrubber Ducky 500, Frangies, and Brian Foster. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Let me know your thoughts on who you think the Jaguars will target and what you think about some of these players. But with that said, we'll see you in the next one, and finally, go Jags.